you are awake before the light. Not because you chose to be. You did not choose much about this morning, or about most of the mornings that preceded it. You are awake because sleep left you sometime in the third hour of the night and did not return, and you lay in the darkness of the barracks, listening to the breathing of the other men and the occasional sound from the street outside the Ludus walls, and the distant sound of the city, which never entirely sleeps. And you thought about today. Today is the day of the fight. The year is 80 ad, give or take. The precise year matters less than the city, which is Rome, and the place within Rome, which is the Ludus Magnus, the great training school that sits in the shadow of the amphitheater that was completed just this year. The enormous oval of stone and concrete and ingenuity that the crowd has already begun to call simply the Colosseum, after the colossal statue of Nero that stands nearby. You have seen the amphitheater from the outside many times. Today, you will see it from the inside. Today, you will walk out through the gate of life onto the sand of the arena floor with 70,000 people watching, and something will happen, and you do not know exactly what that something will be. And this is the thing that kept you awake in the third hour of the night. You are listening to Histomnia. If this kind of story helps you rest, consider subscribing. It truly helps the channel grow. And let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? We love knowing who is with us in the quiet hours. And if there is a topic you would like to hear next, leave it below. The barracks of the Ludus Magnus are not what people imagine when they imagine a gladiator's life. They are not a dungeon. They are not a pit of misery and despair, though misery and despair have certainly been present here at various points. They are a functional institution, a training school essentially, with the specific characteristics of an institution that houses men who are simultaneously valuable property and potential killers, which means the security is real and the conditions are adequate, and the two things coexist in the particular way that practical Roman thinking tended to produce. Your cell is small. The bed is a wooden frame with a straw mattress. There is a blanket, adequate for the October nights. The door can be locked from the outside, and it is locked at night, and you are under no illusions about what that means. But the food is good. This is the thing that surprises people who learn about the gladiatorial life from outside it. The food is genuinely good. The medical care is genuinely attentive. The training is serious and professional, and delivered by people who know what they are doing, and who have a financial interest in producing fighters who can actually fight. You are not cheap. The lanista, the man who owns this school, who bought you or trained you or both, has invested considerable money in making you what you are, and the investment requires maintenance. You eat well. Your injuries are treated. Your body is the asset, and the asset is managed. who are you? This question has a more complicated answer than it might appear. The popular image of the gladiator, the enslaved prisoner of war, fighting against his will, seeking only death or freedom, is not wrong exactly, but it is not the whole picture. Some gladiators were indeed enslaved people, captured in the wars that kept expanding Rome's boundaries and feeding its appetite for both labor and spectacle. Some were convicted criminals, sentenced to the arena as a form of execution that the crowd found entertaining. But a significant number, perhaps a third, perhaps more, by the time of the period you are living in, were volunteers, free men, and occasionally free women, who signed a contract with the lanista, surrendered certain legal rights, and entered the gladiatorial life deliberately, for reasons that made sense to them at the time and that continue to make sense to varying degrees as the time goes on. You fall into this last category, which puts you in the company of men who were desperate or ambitious, or both. The contract you signed 3 years ago gave the lanista the right to bind, beat and kill you if the professional requirements of the gladiatorial life demanded it. These are the actual words of the standard contract, the infamia, the legal disgrace that attached to gladiators and to actors and to prostitutes and to others whose bodies were publicly used in ways that Roman law considered incompatible with full citizenship. In exchange, you received training, housing, food, medical care, and a share of the prize money from bouts you won. The calculation seemed reasonable at the time. It still seems reasonable most days. Today is not most days. 3 years ago you were a freedman from Capua, a man who had been enslaved and had been manumitted, released, given the formal hat of freedom by a master who had his reasons and who had found himself in possession of freedom and very little else. Freedom without resources is its own kind of constraint. The gladiatorial contract offered resources. It offered training in something, a skill, a craft, the specific and demanding craft of arena combat that could be converted into money and into the particular kind of fame that the Roman crowd extends to men who fight well and survive. It offered a version of a career in a city where most of the careers available to a freedman from Capua were considerably less interesting. You became a murmillo. This is your type, one of the standard categories of gladiator that the Roman spectacle had developed over centuries of refinement, each type distinguished by specific equipment and specific fighting style, and matched against specific opponents in combinations that the crowd understood and appreciated. The murmillo fights with the gladius, the short Roman sword, and the large rectangular scutum shield, and wears a visored helmet with a fish-shaped crest, and is matched most typically against the thraex, who fights with a curved sickle blade and a small round palmula shield, or against the hoplomachus, who carries a spear and a small shield. You have fought both. You have won both. This is why you are still here. Your record is 4 wins and no losses, which makes you a spectabilis, a fighter who has shown enough to attract attention, but not yet enough to be considered a primus palus, a fighter of the first rank. The difference matters. It matters in how the crowd responds to your name when it is announced. It matters in how much the lanista can charge for your appearance. It matters in the quality of the opponent you will be matched against today, which is an opponent of similar record and similar rank. A match that the editor, the man financing today's games, has paid for specifically because 2 fighters of similar caliber produce the best spectacle and the most uncertainty about the outcome. And uncertainty is what the crowd comes for. Outside, the city is beginning its day. You can hear it through the small high window of the barracks, the sounds of Rome waking, the carts that are allowed inside the city walls only at night, making their last runs before the dawn prohibition takes effect. The voices of the early vendors, the distant sound of the Tiber, the particular urban morning noise of a city of 1 million people assembling itself for another day. Most of those 1 million people will go about their ordinary business today. Some of them will be at the amphitheater. You will be at the amphitheater. The difference between watching and being watched is the difference that today is made of. You sit up. The straw mattress rustles. In the cell next to yours, you can hear Quintus, your closest friend in the Ludus, a retiarius who fights with a net and trident, and who has 7 wins to his name, and who is not fighting today, turning in his sleep. Quintus is fighting next week. You have had the conversation that fighters have before bouts. The conversation that is mostly not about the bout, because talking about the bout directly is not something that either of you finds useful. The conversation that circles around the thing without landing on it. The way that people who understand each other talk about the things they are afraid of. You are not afraid. This is not bravado. It is something more specific than the absence of fear, the particular psychological state that 3 years of training and 4 bouts have produced, a state in which the fear is present but transformed, metabolized into something that the body can use rather than something that the body is paralyzed by. The doctors, the trainers, spent considerable time on this, not on suppressing fear, which is neither possible nor desirable, but on channeling it, on turning the physiological reality of fear into the heightened attention and the faster reactions and the specific quality of presence that good fighters describe and that you have learned to access, and that today, in the arena, will be either sufficient or not sufficient, and you will find out which. The door of the barracks opens, a guard with a lamp. The food before a fight is specific. Not the food you eat every other day of your life in the Ludus. The substantial meals of barley and beans and olive oil that have been building your body for 3 years. The diet that the Greek physician attached to the Ludus recommends with a specificity and a conviction that you have learned to trust because the evidence of it is visible in your own body, in the muscle and the endurance that the barley and the beans and the training have produced. That food is for building. The food this morning is different, lighter, carefully chosen. The physician's instructions followed by the kitchen with the same attention to detail that the lanista applies to everything that affects the performance of his fighters. Because the performance of his fighters is the performance of his investment. You eat with the other men who are fighting today. There are 6 bouts scheduled, which means 12 fighters. Though 2 of them are not here yet, they are from another Ludus, brought in for specific matchups that the editor wanted. The complicated commerce of the gladiatorial world, producing its usual mixture of institutional loyalty and practical flexibility. The men who are here eat with the focused attention of people who are hungry but not excessively so, who understand that the meal is fuel and that fuel has an optimal quantity that today's specific requirements demand, not more and not less. The Ludus Magnus is the largest and most prestigious of the 4 gladiatorial schools in Rome. Its location, directly adjacent to the amphitheater and connected to it by an underground tunnel, is not accidental. It was built this way deliberately. The proximity a practical convenience that serves the logistics of the games, and that also produces a specific psychological effect in the men who train here, who live their daily lives in the literal shadow of the building in which their professional existence is most fully expressed. You can see the top of the amphitheater from the exercise yard. On the mornings when the games are scheduled and the crowd begins to arrive before dawn, you can hear them. Today, you can hear them. The Ludus is a community. This is the thing that the popular image of gladiatorial life consistently misses. The degree to which the men who train and live and fight here constitute a genuine social world, with its own hierarchy and its own relationships and its own culture. The specific culture of people who share an unusual and dangerous profession and who develop, in sharing it, the particular bonds that unusual and dangerous professions produce. You know these men, not all of them equally. There are perhaps 100 fighters in the Ludus at any given time, and the full range of human social dynamics is present among them. The friendships and the rivalries and the indifferences and the occasional genuine enmities that 100 men living in close quarters over years inevitably produce. But you know them in the way that people who train together daily know each other, which is in some respects more deeply than people who merely share a living space. Quintus, you have already mentioned. He is from Alexandria originally, brought to Rome as a young man by a merchant who sold him to a previous lanista, and he has been in the gladiatorial life for 11 years, which makes him a veteran, a palus, a post, in the training terminology, someone whose standard other fighters are measured against. He fights as a retiarius, the net and trident man, the type that the crowd tends to love and that other fighters tend to respect for the specific and demanding combination of athleticism and technique it requires. He has won 23 bouts. He has the Ludus, the wooden sword that indicates a fighter who has been granted Missio, release from service by an editor, but he has chosen to continue fighting anyway, which is not unusual among fighters who have no compelling reason to stop and who have not yet worked out what else they would do with themselves. You eat with Quintus now, even though he is not fighting today. He has chosen to sit with you because this is what he does on the mornings when someone he cares about is fighting, has done it since before you arrived, a personal ritual that functions as a form of support that neither of you would describe in those terms. He eats his own breakfast and talks about things that are not today, about a woman he has been seeing in the Sabura, about a chariot race he watched last week, about a dispute between two of the newer fighters over a piece of equipment that has been generating low-level drama in the barracks for the past several days. You listen and contribute where appropriate, and the food goes down, and the morning passes, and neither of you mentions the amphitheater. The doctors arrive with the dawn. Your primary trainer is a man named Marcus Sulla, no relation to the dictator, a coincidence of nomenclature that he finds neither amusing nor irritating, simply a fact, who was himself a Murmillo of some distinction 20 years ago, and who retired with his winnings and his scars and his accumulated knowledge of arena combat, and translated all of it into a career as a trainer that has produced over 2 decades an impressive list of successful fighters. He is not warm. He is not harsh. He is precise and demanding and consistent, and he has been the most important person in your professional development. The man whose eye caught the things you were doing wrong, and whose instruction corrected them, and whose opinion of your capabilities you trust more than your own. He watches you eat, not intrusively. He is across the room, eating his own breakfast, apparently occupied with a conversation with one of the other trainers, but his eye passes over you once, twice. The assessment automatic and continuous, the trainer's eye that never fully turns off. When breakfast is finished, he comes to where you are sitting and looks at you for a moment with the expression that you have learned to read over 3 years of daily contact. The expression that means he is satisfied with what he sees and will not therefore say anything, because Marcus Sulla's operating principle is that what is wrong requires comment and what is right requires nothing. He says, "Good," and leaves. This is the highest form of pre-bout assessment you will receive from him, and it is sufficient. The morning training session for non-fighting days at the Ludus is already underway in the exercise yard. The newer fighters going through their drills with the wooden practice weapons, the heavy Ludus that weighs twice what the actual gladius weighs, the training technique that builds the muscles for the real weapon while making the real weapon feel lighter by comparison. You can hear the rhythmic impacts of wood on the practice posts, the palus that gives the ranking system its name, and the shouts of the trainers, and the particular sounds of men working their bodies through the demanding and repetitive routines that 3 years ago you found impossible, and that now you perform without thinking. You did not perform them without thinking at the beginning. You arrived at the Ludus 3 years ago as a freedman from Capua who had some strength and some quickness and essentially no fighting skills of any organized kind. And the first months were an education in how little you knew about what fighting actually required. The casual violence that you had encountered in your life before the Ludus. The fights that broke out in markets and taverns, and that most men with any physical confidence believed they understood, bore almost no relationship to what the doctors were teaching, which was a craft, a technical discipline with specific principles and specific techniques and a specific physical foundation that had to be built before the techniques could be applied. The training began with footwork, not weapons, not strikes, not the dramatic elements of arena combat that the crowd sees and celebrates. Footwork, the management of distance, the maintenance of balance under pressure, the specific way that a fighter with a large shield moves and pivots and angles his body to use the shield's protection while keeping the weapon available and the feet underneath him where they need to be. You spent 6 weeks on footwork before Marcus Sulla let you touch a sword. At the time, this seemed absurd. In your first bout, 18 months into training, you understood why. Your first bout was against a fighter from the Ludus Dacicus, a Thraex with 2 wins who was approximately at your level of experience and who was matched against you in what the editor's people described as a tyro bout, a bout between new fighters, relatively lower stakes, useful to the editor as an undercard before the main events, and useful to the lanista as an opportunity to assess his newer fighters under real conditions. The crowd at a tyro bout is smaller and less intense than the crowd at the main events, which is both a relief and its own kind of pressure. The smaller crowd means less noise, which means you can hear things that the noise of a full amphitheater would drown out, including the specific sound of your own breathing and the sound of the other man's movements on the sand. You won. Not cleanly, not impressively. The doctor's assessment afterward was detailed and specific about the things you did wrong, which were numerous, but you won. And the editor gave the thumbs up, and the crowd gave a reasonable response for a tyro bout, and you walked back through the gate of life on your own 2 feet, which is the fundamental metric. 3 more bouts, 3 more wins, each one different, each one adding to the accumulated understanding of what arena combat actually requires that no amount of training can fully provide. You are better now than you were after the first bout, significantly better, and you will be better after today than you are now, assuming today goes the way the first 4 days went, which is the assumption you are operating on, while simultaneously holding the full awareness that assumptions about arena combat are a specific kind of dangerous. The sun is up. The city is fully awake. From somewhere beyond the Ludus walls, the first sounds of the crowd assembling at the amphitheater are audible, not the roar of the full house that will come later, but the early noise of people finding their seats and greeting each other and beginning the communal ritual of the games day, which starts hours before the gladiatorial bouts begin, with the animal hunts and the executions and the various other spectacles that the Roman entertainment complex has developed to fill a full day of public leisure. Marcus Sulla appears in the doorway of the dining area. He looks at you. He tilts his head toward the armory. This is the first thing that the popular image of gladiatorial combat gets wrong. The image of the fighter strapping on his equipment in a few quick practiced movements and striding out ready for battle. The reality is slower and more deliberate, a process that takes the better part of an hour when done correctly. Which it must be done correctly, because the equipment that is incorrectly fitted is equipment that will fail at the moment it is most needed, and the moment it is most needed is not a moment that accommodates failure. You begin with the subligaculum, the heavy linen loincloth that is the foundation of the gladiatorial kit, the garment that will be under everything else and that must be tight enough to stay in place through the full range of movement that the fight will require without being so tight that it restricts. This is more technical than it sounds. You have learned through 3 years of training and 4 bouts exactly how to wrap it. The specific technique that Marcus Sulla demonstrated and that you practiced until it became automatic. The way that all technical knowledge eventually becomes automatic if you practice it enough and if you survive long enough to accumulate the practice. The fasciae come next, the linen wrappings that protect the arms and legs, the medieval equivalent of which would be called bandages, but that in the gladiatorial context are more precisely a kind of soft armor, providing impact absorption and some protection against the kind of minor cuts and abrasions that arena combat produces in quantity. The wrapping of the fasciae is itself a skill. The tension and the overlap and the direction of the wrap varying depending on the specific part of the body and the specific requirements of your fighting type. A Mamilo's left arm, the shield arm, is wrapped differently from the right arm needing more freedom of movement for the sword, while the left needs more impact protection for the shield work. The manica goes on the right arm, your sword arm. The manica is a segmented metal and leather sleeve that protects the arm from shoulder to wrist, the segments overlapping like scales. The whole assembly articulated to allow the arm to move freely while providing substantial protection against the curved sicker blade of the thrax, which is designed to hook around the shield and find the exposed arm behind it. You have a scar on your right forearm from your third bout, a cut that found a gap between the manica and the fasciae below it, that the physician cleaned and closed, and that healed cleanly, and that now sits white against the skin as a specific and permanent reminder of a specific and avoidable mistake that you have not made again. The greave, the ochrea, goes on the left leg, a single greave, protecting the lower left leg from knee to ankle. The right leg left unprotected because the fighting stance of the murmillo keeps the right leg back where it is less exposed. The greave is bronze, formed to the specific shape of your leg by the armorer who maintains the Ludus's equipment, to fit precise in a way that matters, because an ill-fitting greave shifts under impact, and the shifting is more dangerous than the impact itself. You have worn this specific greave for 2 years. It fits the way things fit when they have been worn and adjusted and worn again, until the object and the body have reached an accommodation. The shield, the scutum, is the most important piece of equipment you carry, and the one that requires the most thought about how it is to be used. The murmillo's scutum is large, curved, rectangular, covering the body from chin to knee when held correctly. A substantial weight of wood and leather and bronze edging that the left arm carries for the duration of the fight, which can be anywhere from a few minutes to considerably longer, depending on how the fight develops. You have trained your left arm for 3 years specifically for this, the specific musculature required to hold and maneuver a shield of this size and weight under combat conditions is different from the musculature required for most other physical activities, and it has been built deliberately and maintained carefully. Because the arm that gets tired before the fight is over is the arm that lets the shield drop at the wrong moment. The helmet is last. The Galea murmillonis, the murmillo helmet, is a visored, full-face helmet with a broad brim that protects the neck and shoulders from overhead cuts. A high crest in the shape of a fish that gives the type its name, and a grilled visor that protects the face while allowing vision. Putting on the helmet changes everything. The world narrows to what can be seen through the grille. The peripheral vision significantly reduced, the sound muffled and changed in quality, the heat inside the helmet beginning immediately and building throughout the fight. Fighting in a full helmet is a skill in itself. The management of the reduced vision, the compensation for the altered soundscape, the maintenance of spatial awareness when the sensory information available has been significantly reduced. You have practiced this for 3 years. You are comfortable in the helmet in the way that you are comfortable in nothing else that is simultaneously so restrictive and so necessary. Marcus Sulla checks the equipment. He does this with the systematic attention of a man who has checked equipment before hundreds of bouts and who knows exactly what to look for and where, the specific points of potential failure, the connections and the fastenings and the fit that must be right or must be corrected before you walk out of this room. His hands move over the manicure, checking the articulation. He looks at the greave fastenings. He taps the shield rim with one knuckle, listening to something that you have never quite been able to identify, but that he clearly can. He looks at the helmet from every angle. He says nothing. This means everything is correct. The gladius is the last thing, the actual weapon, not the wooden training rudis, but the real thing, the short double-edged iron blade that is the instrument of your trade. The gladius of the arena is not identical to the military gladius of the legions, though it derives from it. It is slightly shorter, slightly heavier at the point, balanced for the specific requirements of one-on-one combat, rather than the pushing and stabbing of formation warfare. This specific gladius has been yours for 18 months, issued to you after your second bout, its weight and balance calibrated to your hand and your style by the armorer, in the same process of accommodation that produced the greave. You know exactly how it feels. You know exactly what it will and will not do. This knowledge is not comforting exactly, but it is grounding. The specific, tactile, physical grounding of a tool that is familiar in the hand. You are a murmillo. Let us consider what this means beyond the equipment. The gladiatorial types that Rome developed over centuries of spectacle are not arbitrary categories. Each represents a specific fighting style, with specific strengths and specific vulnerabilities. And the matchups between types are chosen to highlight these contrasts in ways that the crowd finds interesting and that maintain the aesthetic of the games as a demonstration of different approaches to combat rather than a simple test of who is stronger. The Murmillo style is based on the aggressive use of the large shield, using it not just as passive protection, but as an offensive weapon. Pressing with it, controlling the opponent's movement, using the shield's size to manage distance and to set up the gladius strikes that follow. It is a style that rewards patience and strength and the ability to read the opponent's weight and movement through the shield contact. Your opponent today is a Thraex. You know this because the editor's people communicated the matchup through the Lanista 2 days ago, as is standard, not the specific fighter, not his name or his record, but the type, which is sufficient for preparation. The Thraex fights with the curved Sika and the small palmula shield, a combination that demands very different things than what you do: speed and agility, and the ability to find the angles around your large shield that the small curved blade is specifically designed to exploit. The Thrax is theoretically the Murmillo's natural opponent, the matchup considered classic by the Roman crowd, repeated in arenas throughout the empire in countless variations, because the contrast between the two styles produces the kind of fight that spectators understand and appreciate. You have fought a Thrax once before in your second bout and won, but winning a single bout against a type tells you only so much about fighting that type, and the fighter you will face today is not the fighter you faced 18 months ago. Marcus Sulla has given you his analysis based on whatever information the Ludus's network has produced about your opponent. Information that circulates in the gladiatorial world the way all professional information circulates, through the connections between trainers and laniste and the fighters themselves, partial and sometimes unreliable, but better than nothing. The opponent is fast. This is the primary thing Marcus Sulla communicated, the quality that matters most in the matchup between the Murmillo's patient shield work and the Thrax's aggressive angling. Fast means you will need to be disciplined about your shield positioning, that the moments when the shield drops or angles wrong, the moments that a slower opponent cannot exploit quickly enough to matter, will be exploited. Fast means the fight will not be decided by strength, which you have in abundance, but by patience and precision, which you have been building for 3 years, and which today will determine whether they are sufficient. The armor is on. The sword is in your hand. The helmet is in the crook of your left arm, not yet on your head. There is still time before that. Still time before the weight and the heat and the narrowed vision become the condition of your existence. Marcus Sulla stands in front of you. He looks at you for a long moment with the expression that you have come to understand over 3 years means something that he will not say. Something about the years of work and the results of that work, and the fact that today is the test of it in the most literal possible sense. He says, you are ready. You put on the helmet. The world narrows. The fight begins to become real. The tunnel connects the Ludus to the amphitheater. You will not use it today. The tunnel is for logistics, for the movement of equipment and animals and the various materials that the games require, and for the specific circumstance when security or weather makes the surface route impractical. On a games day in good weather, the fighters walk. This is deliberate. The procession through the streets of Rome from the Ludus to the amphitheater is part of the spectacle, part of what the crowd is paying for. The visual statement that the games are happening and that the men who will fight in them are real and present and moving through the city that will watch them die or triumph this afternoon. The streets are already crowded. Rome on a games day is Rome in a specific state of collective excitement that has no precise modern equivalent. Not quite the atmosphere of a modern sporting event, though it contains elements of that, and not quite a religious festival, though it contains elements of that too. The games are woven into the fabric of Roman public life in a way that makes separating them from the political and the religious and the social impossible, because they are all of these things simultaneously. The editor who is financing today's games, a wealthy senator whose name you know, but whose face you have never seen, is buying public goodwill with this spectacle. The Roman political tradition of bread and circuses operating in its most literal form. The crowd that has been gathering since before dawn is not simply an audience, it is a constituency. You walk in a group, the 12 fighters scheduled for today's bouts, accompanied by the lanista and his assistants, and a small group of armed guards whose presence is more symbolic than practical. The symbolism being the statement that these men are under the Ludus's authority and are being delivered to the editor's games in the proper institutional manner. You walk in your armor, which is both practical, the equipment must get to the arena, and theatrical, the sight of armored gladiators moving through the city streets being one of the subsidiary spectacles of the games day, drawing the crowd's attention and generating the specific excitement that the sight of armed men in the context of anticipated combat produces in people who are already in the mood for it. The crowd responds to you. This is the first time today that you will experience what the crowd's attention actually feels like directed at you specifically. And it is different from what you might expect if you had not experienced it before. It is not the roar of the arena that is different in scale and intensity and specific emotional content. This is something more like a current, a continuous low-level attention that you can feel without being able to precisely identify its source. The weight of being observed by many people simultaneously. The specific quality of public visibility that the gladiatorial life produces and that you have learned over 4 bouts and 3 years to manage without being destabilized by it. Some people call out, not your name. Most of the crowd does not know your name. You are not yet famous enough to be recognized on the street, but they call out to the group, the general enthusiasm of people who are anticipating an afternoon of spectacle, expressing itself in the specific way that Roman crowds express enthusiasm, which is loudly and with specific reference to specific things they hope to see, some of which you find encouraging and some of which you find less so. The city you are walking through is extraordinary. You have lived in Rome for 3 years, but the nature of the gladiatorial life, the containment within the Ludus, the structure of training days, the limited and supervised time outside the walls, means that you see the city in fragments rather than whole, pieces of it glimpsed on the occasions when the lanista permits excursions, which are not frequent. Walking through it now, in armor, with the crowd pressing on both sides, and the morning sun already bright on the stone of the buildings, you are aware of the scale of the place in a way that the daily proximity of it tends to obscure. Rome is enormous. It is a city of 1,000,000 people in a world where most cities hold tens of thousands. A concentration of humanity and construction and noise and smell and commerce that has no parallel anywhere on Earth at this moment in history. The Suburra is the neighborhood you pass through, the dense, loud, vertically stacked district of apartment buildings and street-level shops and taverns and workshops that is home to the majority of Rome's working population. The people who are neither rich enough for the hills nor poor enough for the worst of the riverside slums. The middle mass of urban life that makes the city function. The Suburra on a games day is the Suburra in its most festive register. The tabernae already doing business, the upper floors of the insulae full of people leaning out to watch the procession pass, children perched on window ledges, the noise of the place amplified by the collective excitement of a day that has been anticipated for weeks. A woman throws flowers. This happens sometimes. The specific celebrity of the gladiatorial world producing its specific form of public adoration. The fighter as a figure of fascination and danger, and the particular attraction that proximity to violence and mortality seems to generate in some portion of every crowd that watches combat sports. You are aware, without being particularly moved by it, that the gladiatorial life confers a specific kind of fame that other lives available to a freedman from Capua do not. This awareness does not change what today is. It is simply part of the landscape of the day. You turn a corner and the Colosseum is visible. The word that comes to you in this moment is not adequate. No word that you have access to is adequate, which is perhaps why the crowd, when it first saw the completed amphitheater, apparently went temporarily silent, not from awe exactly, though awe is present, but from the simple cognitive difficulty of processing something that is larger than the available frameworks for largeness. You have seen the building before. You have trained in its literal shadow, but seeing it at this angle, approaching it through the streets, the full oval of it visible rising above the rooftops of the surrounding buildings, the 4 stories of arches, and the sheer volume of stone that the Flavian dynasty spent a decade assembling. This is different from the familiar glimpse over the Ludus wall. 70,000 people can fit inside that building. 70,000 people are, at this moment, in the process of filling it. You can hear them from here, not the individual voices, not any specific sound, but the aggregate noise of 70,000 people assembling for a shared purpose. A sound that has a physical quality, a pressure that you can feel in your chest, alongside the pressure of the armor and the weight of the shield and the specific weight of today. The procession approaches the gate of life. This is the entrance through which the fighters enter the arena, the Porta Sana Vivaria, the gate of those who are sound and living. The name a specific and deliberate counterpoint to the Porta Libitinensis, the gate of death through which those who do not leave the arena alive are carried out. The naming is not morbid, or not only morbid, it is the Roman habit of stating things directly, of not softening the realities of what this place is and what happens here. The same habit that produces the infamia of the gladiatorial contract, the explicit acknowledgement that what is happening is not a game. You stop before the gate. The procession has reached its destination. The ceremony of the pompa, the formal procession that begins the games, will happen inside, on the arena floor, the fighters parading before the editor and the crowd in the formal ritual that precedes the bouts. But before the pompa there is a moment, here at the gate, when you are still outside and the arena is still ahead, and today has not yet fully become today. Marcus Sulla is beside you. He says nothing. He has said what he has to say. The rest is yours. You walk through the gate of life. The sound of 70,000 people hits you like a physical thing. The sand is above you. You are in the Hypogeum, the underground world beneath the arena floor. The network of tunnels and chambers and mechanical systems that makes the spectacle above possible and that the crowd never sees. The hidden infrastructure of the Roman entertainment complex that is, in its own way, as impressive an engineering achievement as the amphitheater itself. The Hypogeum is not small. It runs the full length and width of the arena floor above. 2 full stories of corridors and holding cells and equipment rooms, and the complex system of winches and lifts and trapdoors that allow animals and scenery and fighters to appear on the arena floor as if from nowhere. The theatrical machinery of a civilization that understood spectacle as a form of power and invested accordingly. The morning has been long. The pompa is finished. The formal procession around the arena floor. The presentation to the editor in his box. The crowd's response to each fighter as their name was announced. The ritual affirmation of what is about to happen, rendered in the specific ceremonial language of Roman public life. Your name produced a response, not the roar that a famous fighter produces. The recognition of a crowd that has seen you before and has specific memories of specific bouts, but something. A sound from the section of the crowd that follows the gladiatorial rankings and knows a spectabilis with 4 wins when they see one. You heard it through the helmet and registered it and set it aside, because the pompa is not the time for any of the things that the sound might make you feel. Now you wait. The animal hunts, the venations, are happening above you. You can hear them through the arena floor, the sound transformed and muffled by the wood and sand above, but still present, still legible. The crowd responses to specific moments in the hunt, the sounds of the animals themselves, the particular quality of the noise when something happens that the crowd approves of versus the noise when something happens that it does not. You have listened to these sounds from down here before, and you have learned to read them with some accuracy, to track the progress of the events above through the acoustic information that filters down, to know approximately how much time remains before the bouts begin. The Hypogeum has a smell, not an unpleasant smell exactly, though it contains elements that individually would be unpleasant. The smell of animals in their holding pens, the smell of wet sand and stone, the smell of torch, smoke from the torches that provide the only light down here, the smell of men in armor who have been awake since before dawn and who are now waiting in a confined space for something that produces the specific physiological responses that today is producing in you. The smell is simply the smell of this place, specific and unmistakable. The smell that you associate with this particular form of anticipation, because this is where you have experienced it before, in the hours before each of your previous bouts. You find a place to sit, a bench along the wall of one of the wider corridors, away from the animal pens, where the smell is slightly better and the torch provides enough light to see by. The armor is heavy when you sit in it, the weight redistributing in ways that the standing and moving body manages better than the resting one. You have learned to sit in the armor without it becoming uncomfortable. Another of the small technical adaptations that the gladiatorial life produces in a body and a mind that are paying attention. Across the corridor, two fighters from the other Ludus are sitting together, talking in low voices in a language you do not fully understand. They are from the eastern provinces. Their Latin accented and occasional. Their communication with each other in something that might be Greek or might be one of the provincial languages that Rome has absorbed without digesting. You have exchanged the minimal acknowledgements of fighters who will not be facing each other today. A nod, a brief look, the professional courtesy of men in the same trade who are not, at this moment, opponents. What they are saying to each other, you cannot tell, but the tone is recognizable across the language barrier. The specific, low-key, purposeful quality of conversation that is doing the work of keeping the mind occupied without requiring too much of it. Quintus is not here. Quintus is in the stands. The Lanista permits the fighters who are not performing to attend the games as spectators, a practice that is both a reward and a form of professional development. The watching of other fighters' bouts being a legitimate source of technical learning. You know that Quintus is somewhere in the amphitheater above you, watching the Venetians and tracking the time until your bout, and thinking whatever Quintus thinks in these situations, which you know from experience is more than he says, but less than he worries about, which is the specific emotional management of a man who has been doing this for 11 years and has developed the necessary equilibrium. You think about your opponent. Not obsessively. You have learned that obsessive about thinking about the opponent produces a specific kind of mental fatigue that is counterproductive, that the mind needs to be rested as well as prepared, and that there is a point beyond which additional analysis of what you know about the man you will face generates more anxiety than insight. But you think about him with the focused, practical attention that Marcus Sulla has trained you to bring to this specific task. Fast, that is the primary characteristic. Fast means angles. The Thraex who is fast will be looking for the moment when your shield is positioned to cover one line of attack and he can commit to a different one before you can redirect. Managing this requires not just the shield work, but the footwork underneath it. The constant small adjustments of position that keep the angles manageable, that prevent the fast opponent from finding the moment when your coverage is definitively compromised. The other thing about a fast Thraex, the thing that Marcus Sulla mentioned, and that your own experience with the type confirms, is that speed tends to produce aggression, and aggression tends to produce commitment, and commitment produces moments of overextension that the patient Murmillo can exploit. You are not the faster fighter today. You have accepted this. The question is whether you are the more patient one. A cage passes through the corridor, a large animal. You cannot see it clearly in the torchlight. Something large enough that the men moving the cage are moving carefully, and the animal inside is making a sound that is more felt than heard, a subsonic vibration that the body registers before the ears do. The Hypogeum is full of these presences today, the beasts that the Venatio requires, the bears and the big cats, and the more exotic animals that the editor has sourced from the Empire's menageries to provide the specific spectacle that the Roman crowd expects from a morning of animal hunts. The animals are not your concern. They are not your concern professionally, and they are not your concern emotionally, though the proximity to them in the confined space of the Hypogeum produces a specific awareness of shared peril that is not entirely comfortable. The sound from above changes. You have learned to read this change, to identify the specific quality of the crowd noise that indicates the Venetians are concluding, and the transition to the next phase of the day's program is approaching. The crowd noise has a different texture when it is responding to a conclusion versus when it is tracking ongoing action. Something about the rhythm of it, the specific pattern of rise and fall, that indicates a finality rather than a continuation. You sit up straighter. Across the corridor, the two Eastern fighters are on their feet. Their conversation stopped, their attention redirected upward toward the sound. The first bout is not yours. You are scheduled third, which means there are 2 bouts before you, approximately 40 minutes, perhaps an hour, depending on how long the first 2 fights last. Gladiatorial bouts are not fixed in duration. They end when they end, when one fighter is unable to continue, or yields, or when the editor calls a halt, and the duration can range from a few intense minutes to a prolonged exchange that tests the endurance of both fighters and the patience of the crowd. You have been in a bout that lasted less than 5 minutes. and a bout that lasted closer to 20. Today you do not know which kind of day it will be. You stand. It is better to stand than to sit now. The body needs to stay warm, needs to maintain the circulation and the readiness that the armor and the waiting tend to reduce. You begin the specific sequence of movements that Marcus Sulla prescribed for the pre-bout period in the Hypogeum. The controlled exercises that keep the muscles active and the joints mobile without expending the energy that the fight will require. You have done these before every bout. The body knows the sequence. The body finds something like steadiness in the sequence, the familiar routine of preparation, providing a structure that the waiting and the uncertainty and the sound of 70,000 people above your head do not. Above you, the sand is being raked. The first bout is about to begin. The man who will decide whether you live today is sitting in a box. Not God, not fate, not the abstract forces that people invoke when they want to avoid the specific and human reality of how these decisions are made. A man. A senator named Gaius Vitellius Cursor, who inherited a substantial fortune from a father who made it in the grain trade, who has been a member of the Roman Senate for 11 years, who has political ambitions that are best served by the goodwill of the Roman public, and who has spent a sum equivalent to several years of a legionary's salary to finance today's games as a gift to the people of Rome. He is sitting in the editor's box on the north side of the amphitheater with a clear view of the arena floor, flanked by his associates and his clients and the various people whose presence in his box on games day serves the complex social accounting of Roman political life. You will never meet him. This is worth noting. The man who has the power of life and death over you today is a man you have never spoken to and will almost certainly never speak to. A man for whom you are one element of a day's entertainment that he has purchased and presented to the public as a demonstration of his generosity and his power. The relationship between the editor and the gladiator is the relationship between the buyer and the product, mediated by the lanista, who is the seller. And while the product has a perspective on the transaction that the chair and the table and the amphora of wine do not, the structure of the relationship is not fundamentally different from the structure of any other commercial exchange in the Roman world. This is not bitterness, or not primarily bitterness. There is an element of it, unavoidable, the specific emotional residue of living in a society whose fundamental organization places your life in the hands of a man whose name you learned 2 days ago. But bitterness is not useful in the Hypogeum, and you have learned to set it aside with the same practice discipline that you set aside the fear and the excess analysis of the opponent. What is useful is understanding the system, because understanding the system tells you something about how today will go and what the variables are that you can and cannot control. The editor decides the outcome of the bout when the outcome is not decided by the combat itself. The combat can end in several ways. A fighter can be killed outright, a strike that is immediately lethal, which is less common than the popular image suggests, because the equipment and the training of both fighters are specifically designed to prevent it, and because a dead gladiator is an expensive loss that neither the Lannister nor the editor has an interest in producing unnecessarily. A fighter can be so severely injured that continuing is impossible, in which case the bout ends without reference to the editor. Or, most commonly, a fighter who is losing and who cannot continue can appeal for Missio, mercy, the acknowledgement of defeat that invites the editor to make the decision. The Missio appeal is made by dropping the shield and raising the index finger of the left hand. This gesture, directed at the editor's box, transfers the decision to the editor, who in turn looks at the crowd and makes his judgment based on a complex set of factors that include the crowd's mood, the quality of the fight that has been fought, the specific behavior of the fighter who is asking for mercy, and the political calculus of the moment. What decision will produce the best response from the 70,000 people who are watching, and whose goodwill the editor has spent this money to obtain? The crowd's influence on this decision is real but complicated. The popular image, the turned thumb that means death, the raised thumb that means life, is almost certainly wrong in its specifics. The actual gestures used by the Roman crowd to communicate their preference are debated by historians. The source is ambiguous and contradictory in the specific details, while agreeing on the general principle that the crowd communicated a preference and that the editor generally followed it. What is clear is that the crowd's response to a fighter who has fought well and is asking for mercy tends to be more favorable than the crowd's response to a fighter who has fought poorly, or who has shown behavior that the crowd disapproves of. Which is to say, the crowd is not simply bloodthirsty, though it contains people who are bloodthirsty, but is responding to a performance and judging that performance according to criteria that have been developed over centuries of watching gladiatorial combat, and that the fighters understand and try to satisfy. The criteria are something like these: fight hard, fight skillfully, don't show excessive fear, don't ask for mercy too early, and if you must ask for mercy, do it at a moment when the quality of what you have shown makes the appeal reasonable. A fighter who has given the crowd a good bout and who asks for mercy when genuinely overcome has a reasonable chance of receiving it. A fighter who asks for mercy at the first serious setback, who has shown nothing worth valuing, is asking the crowd to value something it has not been given reason to value, and the crowd's response to that request will reflect its assessment accordingly. You have never had to ask for mercy. This is not because your 4 bouts were won easily. None of them were won easily. Each of them contained moments when the outcome was genuinely uncertain, and when the outcome of a specific exchange might have been different, and everything after it might have been different as a result. But in each case, the uncertainty resolved in your favor before reaching the point of appeal. You have thought about the appeal. Marcus Sulla has discussed it with you in the practical, unemotional way that he discusses everything, as a technical contingency that must be understood and prepared for, even if you hope not to use it. You know when to appeal. You know how to appeal. You hope not to need to know. The crowd itself is worth understanding, because it is not a single thing. 70,000 people is not a unified organism with a single response to stimuli. It is a vastly complex collection of individuals whose individual responses aggregate into something that functions like a collective response, but that is always containing within it the full range of individual variation. The section that follows the gladiatorial rankings closely, that knows your record and your style, and has specific expectations of you based on previous bouts. This section is different from the section that is attending its first games, and for whom everything is novel and overwhelming. The section that has bet money on the outcome of today's bouts is different from the section that is there for the experience of collective spectatorship. The women in the upper tiers are different from the senators in the lower ones, though both have opinions and both will express them. What they share, what the 70,000 people in this building share today, regardless of their individual differences, is the specific quality of attention that the arena produces. You will feel this when you walk out onto the sand. You have felt it before, in 4 previous bouts, and it is not something that description fully captures. The weight of collective attention directed at you, the specific intensity of being watched by that many people simultaneously, all of whom are invested in what happens next. It is the most extreme form of public visibility available in the Roman world, and it produces a specific physiological and psychological state that is part of the gladiatorial experience in a way that the training in the Ludus, however thorough, cannot fully replicate. You learn to use it. This is what the experienced fighters say, and what your own experience confirms, that the crowd's attention, rather than being a distraction or a pressure, can be metabolized into something useful, a form of energy that the body can draw on. The specific heightening of perception and reaction that extreme public visibility produces in people who have trained for it and who have learned to channel rather than suppress what it generates. Marcus Sulla talks about this, not in mystical terms. He talks about everything in practical terms, but as a technical reality of arena combat that must be understood and managed like the manicure and the footwork and everything else. Above you, the first bout has begun. You can tell from the sound, the crowd noise has changed again. has acquired the specific rhythmic quality of engagement with ongoing combat, the rises and falls that track specific moments in the exchange, the sounds of collective investment in something that is happening in real time. You cannot see it. You are below it, in the Hypogeum, listening to it through the floor, reading it the way you read everything in this environment, through the available information, which is partial, and the pattern recognition that experience provides, which compensates for the partiality as much as it can. The first bout will end, then the second. Then you will walk up through the gate of life and onto the sand, and 70,000 people will look at you, and the editor in his box will be watching, and Quintus will be somewhere in the stands watching, and Marcus Sulla will be at the gate watching, and the Thrax who is fast will be across the sand from you, and everything that 3 years of training and 4 bouts and today's armor and today's preparation and today's waiting have been building toward will begin. The first bout ends. The crowd tells you this. You stand up straighter. One more. The gate opens and the light hits you like a physical thing, not the filtered light of the Hypogeum, not the morning light in the Ludus yard, not any light you have been in today. The full Mediterranean midday sun reflected off white sand in an open oval of stone that concentrates and amplifies it. The specific quality of light in the Colosseum arena that you have experienced 3 times before, and that still every time requires a moment of adjustment. The eyes behind the helmet grille contracting and then opening to the brightness and the scale of what is in front of you. The sand is pale and raked. The sand in the Colosseum is not ordinary sand. It is a specific mixture, chosen for its color and its texture and its drainage properties, replaced regularly and raked between bouts to remove the evidence of what preceded you, the marks and the stains that combat leaves. Fresh sand, clean sand, the sand that you will be standing on for the next however many minutes, the sand that will tell the story of today in the patterns of its disturbance, the footprints and the drag marks, and whatever else today leaves in it. 70,000 people. The sound is not describable, or it is describable only in the sense that you can approximate it. The sound of a crowd this size in an enclosed space. The specific acoustic properties of the Colosseum's oval, creating a concentration and a resonance that make the aggregate noise of 70,000 people into something that is physically present in the body, something felt in the chest and the bones as much as heard through the ears. You have felt this 3 times before. It is not familiar exactly. The scale of it does not become familiar in the way that smaller things become familiar, but it is recognized, a known quantity whose properties you understand and have prepared for. Across the sand, 50 meters away, the Thrax is walking out through his gate. You look at him for the first time. not the extended assessment of a trainer analyzing an opponent. There is no time for that now, and the information available from this distance and through this helmet grille is limited. What you take in is general size, which is approximately yours, slightly lighter perhaps. The way he moves, which confirms what Marcus Sulla said about speed, the specific quality of economical movement that fast fighters tend to have, the absence of wasted motion, the posture, which is forward-leaning, aggressive, the posture of someone whose style is built on initiative rather than reaction. The referee, the summa ludus, the senior official who will manage the bout, is standing in the center of the arena. He is a former fighter himself, as they typically are, a man whose career in the arena has given him the specific knowledge required to manage a bout between two professional fighters, to recognize when a fighter is genuinely unable to continue versus performing inability, to intervene when the fighting is no longer within the professional rules of the gladiatorial contest, to position himself in the specific places that allow him to observe and intervene without obstructing the fighters or the crowd's view. He looks at you, looks at the Thraex, nods. You walk toward the center. The Thraex walks toward the center. The crowd noise changes as you approach each other. A specific rise, the collective intake of something like breath. The sound of 70,000 people focusing simultaneously on the same small area of the sand. The summa ludus says something, the formal words of the bout's commencement, and steps back, and you and the Thraex are alone in the center of the world's largest arena, with each other and with what happens next. The first exchange is feeling out. This is standard. Both fighters have been told things about the other and have their own analysis and their own intentions, and the first exchanges are the process of testing whether the analysis is accurate and whether the intentions are feasible, of gathering the specific information that only actual contact provides. You push with the shield, not a committed push, a probe, testing his response to shield pressure, whether he steps back or angles away or drives into it. He angles away, quickly, the speed apparent immediately in the smoothness and the timing of the movement, the sicker coming in as he angles and your shield already there. The angle of the sicker glancing off the bronze edge of the scutum rather than finding the face of it. Fast. As advertised, you reset. The crowd responds to the first exchange with a sound that indicates it found it interesting, not the roar of something decisive, but the engaged murmur of people who are watching something they understand and who are tracking the early information with the attention of viewers who know what they are looking for. The crowd at these bouts is not naive. It contains people who have watched hundreds of fights, who can read the technical content of an exchange as readily as you can, who know the difference between a probe and a commitment, and who are assessing what they see with the same kind of practical intelligence that you and the Thraex are applying from the inside. The second exchange is more committed. The Thraex drives, the sicker coming in a sequence, high then low, then the hook that the curved blade is designed for. The hook that goes for the gap behind the scutum on the shield side. You cover the high and the low, and the hook catches the edge of your manica, not the blade, the flat of it. Not a cut, but an impact that you feel in the arm and that registers as information. He is fast enough to find the gap. Not today, not in this exchange, but the gap exists, and he knows it exists, and he will look for it again. You answer with the gladius, not the full commit, the measured strike that tests his shield management, the short economical thrust that the gladius is designed for, aimed at the gap below his small palmular shield that a committed thrust would find if he is covering the wrong line. He covers it, but barely, the palmula moving to the right place, but arriving slightly later than it should. The speed that makes him dangerous on offense, making him slightly less reliable on defense when the sequence comes too fast. You note this, you will use it. This is what the fight actually is, not the dramatic sustained exchange of the popular image. The two men hacking at each other with wild swings until one collapses. The gladiatorial bout is closer to a chess match conducted at combat speed, a sequence of probes and responses and adjustments, each exchange gathering information and spending information, the picture of the opponent's capabilities and tendencies and habits becoming gradually clearer as the bout progresses. The strategy adjusting in real time to what the actual opponent is doing versus what the analysis said he would do. He is faster than any opponent you have faced. This is the primary fact of the first several exchanges, the fact that all the strategy must account for. But fast has a cost. Fast means the movements are large, means the commitment to each attack is high, because speed and the small shield of the Thraex produce an attacking style that is built on making the attacks land, rather than on the patient accumulation of advantage that your style favors. When a fast attack lands, it is decisive. When it does not land, the fighter who made it is extended, the recovery slightly slower than the initiation. You are looking for the extension. You are patient in a way that the crowd, after perhaps 10 minutes of exchanges that have not produced a decisive moment, is beginning to find interesting in a different way. The murmur is changing, the engagement deepening rather than dissipating. The crowd reading the bout correctly as a technical contest between two capable fighters rather than a mismatch that will resolve quickly. This is a good crowd. This is a crowd that knows what it is watching. He finds the gap, not the manica gap. He goes under the shield, the sicker coming in low on the inside, the movement fast enough that the scutum's downward sweep to cover is a fraction late, and the curved blade finds the inside of your left thigh, above the greave, below the bottom edge of the shield in its dropped position. The cut is real, you feel it. The specific sharp announcement that the body makes when something has breached its integrity, not yet the full information of how serious it is, just the signal that something has happened and that something is happening in the left leg. You step back, reset, the crowd roars, the specific sound of 70,000 people responding to the first blood of the bout. The rise that indicates the bout has moved into a new register. You take a breath behind the helmet, the managed breath that Marcus Sulla has drilled into you, the breath that gives you 3 seconds to assess without the assessment being visible. The leg is cut. Not deeply, the movement of stepping back attenuated the blade's path, and the fasciae absorbed some of what the skin did not. The leg is functioning. The leg is carrying your weight. The leg will carry your weight for the duration of what is required. These are the relevant facts, and they are all favorable. And the rest of the information, the pain, the blood, the specific emotional content of having been cut in the arena in front of 70,000 people is not currently relevant and can be processed later if later exists. You attack. This is the counterintuitive response, the response that Marcus Sulla has told you about and that your body now executes without the delay of conscious decision. When the opponent lands a blow and resets, there is a window, a specific brief moment when his weight is shifting back and his attention is on the completion of his own movement and the resumption of his guard. And that window is the moment for initiative. The gladius comes in as you drive with the shield, the 2 movements coordinated, the shield pressure forcing his palmula to respond, and the gladius finding the line that the palmula's response opens. The point of the gladius contacts his shoulder, not the thrust that ends a bout, the controlled strike that scores a hit and establishes that you can find him, that you are not simply absorbing his attacks but answering them, that the cut on your thigh has not changed the fundamental calculation of the bout. The crowd noise is extraordinary. You cannot hear individual voices in it. You are aware of it the way you are aware of the weather, as a condition of the environment, something that exists around you and that you are operating within, something that has weight and pressure, and that is part of the experience without being the focus of it. The focus is the thrax across the sand, the palmula, the sicca, the fast footwork, the gap that you found and that he knows you found, and that the rest of the bout will be shaped around. He is good. He is very good. This is not reassuring information, but it is accurate information, and accurate information is what you need. He is good, and you are good, and one of you will end this bout on your feet, and the other will be on the sand with a finger raised toward the editor's box, and the 70,000 people watching cannot yet tell which is which, and neither, honestly, can you. The bout continues. The moment comes in the 14th minute. You know it is the 14th minute, not because you are counting. There is no counting time in the arena, no clock. no official measure of duration, but because of what your body tells you. The specific accumulation of the bouts demands that registers as information about how long this has been going on and how much of what you started with remains. 14 minutes of arena combat is a long time. It is long enough that the thigh cut from the 5th minute is no longer the sharp announcement it was, and has become instead a continuous low note in the body's ongoing report, the legs still functioning, the blood having slowed to something manageable, the fasciae doing their job. It is long enough that the left arm carrying the scutum has moved past the point of active fatigue into the specific state beyond fatigue, where the arm simply does what it is asked without registering the cost to be paid later. It is long enough that the breath inside the helmet has made the air hot and dense, and that each breath is doing slightly less work than the breath before it. The thorax is tiring too. This is the most important fact of the 14th minute, the fact that the first 13 minutes have been building toward. He is faster than you. This has been true from the first exchange and remains true in the 14th minute. But fast costs more than measured, always, and the cost accumulates. And in the 14th minute, you can read it in the quality of his footwork, which is still quick, but no longer effortless. The movements still accurate, but preceded by a fraction of a second of decision that was not there in the first 5 minutes. The speed is still present. The automatic quality of the speed is not. You have been patient. 14 minutes of patience under the specific pressure of a fast thorax with a curved blade is a kind of patience that the training produces and that nothing else produces. The patience of a body that knows how to absorb without breaking, and of a mind that can hold a strategy through the noise and the crowd and the cut and the fatigue without losing the thread of it. Marcus Sulla's voice is not in your head. It would be wrong to say that. Wrong in the specific way that makes the training sound like something more mystical than it is. What is in your head is the training itself, the pattern recognition, and the physical knowledge that 3 years of daily practice have installed in the body at a level below conscious thought, available without retrieval, because it has become the structure of how you move rather than information that you must access. He drives. The sequence is the same sequence he is returned to throughout the bout. The high, then the low, then the hook. The reliable combination that found the thigh cut in the 5th minute, and that he has been looking to repeat with variations. The thorax attacking in the way that fast fighters attack when they have a successful combination, returning to it because it has worked and because the body in combat tends toward what has worked. You have been covering it differently each time, varying the scutum angle, changing the timing of the parry, not settling into a defensive pattern that he can read and work around. This time you do not parry. You move, not away, The step that takes you out of the line of the hook is a step inside, tighter than the attack expects, the shield driving into his extended arm as the hook completes. The impact of the scutum against his forearm catching him at the end of his own movement's extension. The moment of maximum commitment, when the body has committed everything to the attack and the weight is forward. And the recovery requires a step that the step inside has complicated. He staggers, not falls, not collapses, staggers. The small loss of balance that large fighters produce with shield work when the timing is exactly right. The opponent's own momentum turned against him. The gladius comes up, not the killing thrust. The controlled strike, the point finding the gap at the right side of his body where the small palmula has been carried past the line by the shield impact. The blade going into the depth of a finger's width, enough to be real and enough to be felt and enough to make the accounting of the bout clear to everyone in the arena who is watching, and to the summa ludus who has been tracking the exchanges from his position and who moves now toward the center of the arena in the way that referees move when a bout is approaching its conclusion. The thraex is on one knee. This is not a collapse. It is the controlled acknowledgement of a fighter who knows the position he is in and who is making the specific decision that the position requires. On one knee, the palmula lowered, the sicca no longer extended. The posture of a fighter who is assessing whether the bout can continue and making the assessment honestly. The way that fighters with professional pride make these assessments, without the vanity that says continue when continuation is not the right call, and without the premature capitulation that says stop when stopping is not yet warranted. He raises his finger. The crowd erupts, not the roar of a kill, a different sound, the specific sound of 70,000 people responding to the conclusion of a bout that has given them what they came for. The acknowledgement that something real has happened and that the result is real, and that the fighter on his knee has made the right decision, and that the fighter standing over him has earned what he has earned. It is the loudest sound you have heard today. It is possibly the loudest sound you have heard in your life, and you have heard this sound before, but 3 times before does not make the 5th time smaller. You step back. This is correct form. You do not stand over the fighter who has appealed. Do not crowd him or menace him, because the appeal has transferred the moment to the editor and the crowd, and your role now is to stand at the correct distance and present yourself correctly while the decision is made. You are breathing hard inside the helmet, the breath coming in the specific ragged way that the body breathes after 14 minutes of sustained effort, and the leg is making itself known again in the way that injuries make themselves known when the immediate demand on the body decreases. You stand straight. The helmet does not allow the crowd to see your face, but the body can express what the face cannot. and the body that stands straight after 14 minutes and a thigh cut is expressing something that the crowd can read. The crowd noise resolves into something more specific, not the continuous roar, but the punctuated sound of people communicating their preference. The specific sounds that Roman crowds make when the editor looks to them for the decision on Missio. Sounds that you have heard from the Hypogeum and from the arena floor, and that you are hearing now from the position of the fighter who is waiting to know what the sounds mean for the fighter on his knee. The editor stands. He looks at the crowd. He looks at the fighter on his knee. He looks at you, briefly, the glance of a man making a decision and assembling the relevant information. The Senator Gaius Vitellius Cursor, the man you have never met and will never meet, the man who has the power of life and death over the man on the sand before you, makes his assessment of the political and aesthetic and human calculation that the moment presents. He extends his arm. The thumb is turned, not down, the gesture that ends things, but parallel, the gesture of Missio granted, mercy given, the fighter on his knee to be allowed to leave the arena alive. The crowd's response confirms it. The sound of approval, not unanimous. Nothing in a crowd of 70,000 is unanimous. There are always those who wanted the other result. But the dominant response, the overwhelming majority, the 70,000 condensed into a single preference that the editor has correctly read and expressed. The bout is over. The summa Ludus steps between you and the fighter on his knee. The formal gesture that marks the conclusion of the contest, and the Thraex rises from the sand, and you look at each other for a moment. Not the look of enemies, the look of men who have spent 14 minutes in the closest possible professional contact and who have arrived at this specific moment together and who both know what it cost. He nods. You nod. This is all that is needed. The sand beneath you is disturbed. The footprints of 14 minutes of movement, the mark where he went to one knee, the evidence of the bout laid out in the pale sand like a map of something that happened and is now over. The arena staff are already moving toward the center. It is time to leave the sand. You walk back toward the gate of life. The crowd noise follows you, your name, audible now in the sections that know it. The specific sound of recognition that means something has shifted, that the fighter who walked out through this gate as a spectabilis with 4 winds is walking back through it as something slightly different, as someone the crowd has watched do something worth watching and has decided to remember. The gate is ahead. The light behind you is enormous. You walk through. The physician is waiting. He is always waiting, positioned just inside the gate of life, with his instruments and his experience and his specific professional attention to the bodies that come through this gate after bouts, sometimes walking, sometimes carried, sometimes in conditions that require immediate intervention, and sometimes in conditions that require only the careful assessment of damage that may not be immediately apparent. He is a Greek, as most physicians in Rome are, trained in the tradition of Galen and practicing in the specific context of the gladiatorial school, with the focused expertise that a decade of treating arena injuries produces. His name is Demetrios. You know him well. He looks at the thigh first. This is correct. The cut is the visible injury, the thing that is the injury whose severity needs to be established before the assessment moves to the less visible things. He moves the fasciae aside with practiced hands and looks at what is there, his expression giving away nothing in the way that experienced physicians' expressions give away nothing. The professional neutrality of a man who has seen injuries across the full range of severity and who has learned not to communicate through his face what he has not yet communicated through his words. He says, "Not deep. These are the words you wanted." Not deep means the blade found the skin and the flesh beneath it, but not the structures beneath the flesh, not the large vessels, not the tendons, not the things whose damage produces consequences that the physician's skill cannot address and that the body cannot repair. Not deep means the next weeks will involve healing rather than the more complicated and uncertain process of recovery from serious injury. Means the training will resume on a schedule that is weeks rather than months. Means today's outcome extends in the most practical way into the days that follow it. He cleans the wound. This is the procedure that Demetrios performs with the specific conviction of a man who has learned through observation that wounds cleaned promptly and thoroughly have better outcomes than wounds left to manage themselves. A conviction that runs ahead of the theoretical understanding of why this is true. The germ theory of disease is 17 centuries away, but the empirical observation that clean wounds heal better than dirty ones is available to anyone who has treated enough wounds to see the pattern. The cleaning involves wine, not for drinking, for the wound itself. The antiseptic properties of the alcohol, something that Demetrios understands practically, if not biochemically. It stings in the specific and productive way that effective treatment sometimes stings. Then the bandaging, the pressure dressing that will hold the wound closed while the body does its work. The linen strips applied with the tension and the overlap that Demetrios has calibrated through years of practice to provide the right amount of compression without restricting the circulation. He works quickly and without conversation. You sit on the bench in the corridor just inside the gate and let him work and breathe and experience what the body experiences when the immediate demand on it has been lifted and the accounting begins to come in. The accounting is considerable. The thigh is the main entry. The cut, the specific and bounded pain of it that the cleaning and the bandaging have transformed from the sharp into the deep. the kind of pain that you know from experience will peak in the next few hours and then begin the long process of diminishing. The left arm is the secondary entry, the accumulated fatigue of 14 minutes of shield work, not injured, not damaged in any structural sense, simply deeply tired in the specific way that heavily worked muscles are tired. The tiredness that will be soreness tomorrow and stiffness the day after, and that will resolve in a week into the stronger version of itself that training produces. The rest of the body follows. The knees, the back, the neck that has been carrying the helmet for an hour. The accumulated physical cost of today that is now presenting itself for acknowledgement. You are alive. This is the primary fact. You are sitting on a bench inside the gate of life with a physician, cleaning and dressing the cut on your thigh and the sound of the crowd. Above you responding to whatever is happening in the sixth bout of the day, and you are alive, and the accounting of what today cost is considerable and entirely acceptable. Quintus arrives. He comes through the side entrance that connects the spectator areas to the service corridors, moving with the specific purposeful speed of someone who has been watching from the stands and who has come to the location of the person he was watching as quickly as the physical layout of the building allowed. He looks at you. He looks at the physician. He looks at the thigh. He sits down on the bench beside you without saying anything, which is the correct response. The response of someone who understands what the moment contains and who does not feel the need to fill it with language. After a moment he says, "The third exchange in the 8th minute was the best shield work I've seen from you." This is also the correct response. Not "Are you all right?" Not "Well done." Not any of the emotional registers that the moment might seem to call for. The specific technical observation of a professional who has been watching professionally. The compliment expressed in the only currency that means anything in this context, which is the accurate assessment of specific craft. You think about the third exchange in the 8th minute and you know which one he means, and you know he is right, and you say so. Demetrios finishes. He gives you his instructions. The wound to be kept clean. The fascia to be changed tomorrow. No training for 2 weeks. The diet to include more meat for the next 10 days. The specific regimen that the physician of a gladiatorial school has developed for the post-bout recovery period. You have had versions of these instructions before, after each bout, and you follow them with the same discipline that you bring to the training, because the recovery is part of the preparation for the next bout, just as the training is. And the fighter who treats recovery as an interruption of training rather than a component of it is the fighter who compounds injuries rather than resolving them. The prize money comes later. This is the formal transaction, the lanista receiving from the editors, representatives, the fee for the bout, a portion of which will come to you according to the terms of your contract. The money that is the material translation of what today cost and what today produced. You know approximately what the amount will be. 4 wins and a good fight produce a specific market value in the gladiatorial economy, and the fight today was long enough and close enough that the bonus payment that editors sometimes add for exceptional bouts is a realistic possibility. You will not see the money today. You will see it in the next few days through the Lannister's accounting in the specific way that all the transactions of the gladiatorial life are mediated through the Lannister's accounting. The prize money matters and does not entirely matter. It matters because money is what the gladiatorial contract is ultimately about for a freeman who signed it. The material justification for the infamia and the risk and the specific quality of life that the Ludus produces. You are saving, not obsessively, not with a fixed plan that you can describe in detail, but with the steady accumulation of someone who knows that the gladiatorial life has a duration that is measured not just by injury and death, but by the body's capacity to perform at the level the arena requires, and that the duration is finite, and that what comes after the duration requires a foundation that must be built. During it, what comes after? This is the question that the post-bout corridor always raises. The specific thoughtfulness of the recovery period when the immediate demands of performance are behind you, and the next demands have not yet arrived, and the mind has room to move in directions that the training and the preparation and the fighting do not allow. Some fighters become trainers, the career of Marcus Sulla, the most direct path from the arena to a life that uses what the arena taught without requiring what the arena requires. Some open businesses, the gladiatorial fame translating into the specific commercial advantage of a name that people recognize, a tavern or a school or some other enterprise that benefits from the association. Some simply continue fighting until they cannot, the rudis accumulating wins until the body can no longer deliver what the winds require, and then they stop and figure out what comes next from the position of having stopped. You have not decided. You are 31 years old and you have won 5 bouts, and your body is telling you what today cost, with a specificity and a thoroughness that the body reserves for the post-combat period when it has your full attention. And you are sitting in the corridor inside the gate of life, with Quintus beside you and Demetrios gathering his instruments, and the crowd above you still making the sounds that crowds make, and the question of what comes after is present and real and not yet answerable. The 6th bout ends. You can tell from the sound, the specific quality of the crowd noise that marks conclusion, the different register of the dispersal beginning, the shift from collective engagement to the individual business of leaving the amphitheater that happens at the end of the games day. 70,000 people beginning to go home. The The sound of it is different from the sound of arrival, less tense, more satisfied. The specific quality of a crowd that has received what it came for and is now returning to the rest of its life. You stand. The leg registers the standing, the wound, the specific complaint of disturbed tissue being asked to support weight, the adaptation that will take a few days to stop being as noticeable as it is today. You stand anyway. The body does what you ask it to do. This is the fundamental fact of the gladiatorial life. The fact that everything else depends on the body's willingness, built through training and maintained through care, to do what is asked of it when it is asked, in the arena and in the corridor afterward, and in the recovery that follows, and in the training that follows the recovery. Quintus stands with you. You walk together toward the tunnel that leads back to the Ludus, away from the arena, away from the sand and the editor's box and the crowd that is now dispersing into the streets of Rome, carrying with them whatever today gave them, the memory of a particular exchange or a particular moment, or the general satisfaction of an afternoon of spectacle that met the expectations that the editor's money had created. Behind you, the arena staff are raking the sand. The barracks are quiet when you return. Not empty. The Ludus is never entirely empty. The institution too large and too continuous for complete quiet, but quieter than the morning. The specific quality of a place that has sent some of its members into the world and is receiving them back. The post-games day atmosphere that settles over the school in the hours after the bouts. The combination of relief and tiredness and the specific emotional residue of a day that was significant in ways that the ordinary training days are not. Your cell is exactly as you left it. The bed, the chest, the candle stub that has not been replaced, the small high window through which a rectangle of late afternoon sky is visible, turning from the blue of the afternoon toward the warmer tones of the evening. You sit on the bed, and the bed receives you, and you sit in it for a moment without moving, without performing any of the tasks that the return requires, simply present in the specific stillness of a body that has been asked for everything it has and that is now temporarily released from asking. Consider what you are, not what the crowd thinks you are. The crowd's understanding of what a gladiator is has been shaped by the spectacle, by the specific presentation of the gladiatorial life that the arena makes available, which is a presentation of a specific and dramatic hour in a life that contains many other hours that are not dramatic and not available to the crowd's observation. The crowd sees the fight. The crowd does not see the training, the recovery, the waiting in the Hypogeum, the physician's corridor, the barracks at night, the specific texture of the daily life that the fight emerges from and returns to. What the crowd sees is real. The fight is real. The danger is real. The skill is real, but it is a fraction of the reality. The the visible portion of something that is mostly invisible. The gladiator in the Roman imagination is a figure of tremendous symbolic weight. He is the embodiment of virtus, the Roman virtue that encompasses courage and skill, and the willingness to face death without flinching. The quality that Roman culture valued above most others, and that the gladiatorial combat demonstrated in its most concentrated and public form. He is simultaneously infamous, legally disgraced, stripped of the full citizenship rights that his courage in the arena might otherwise seem to deserve. The paradox of the gladiatorial position built into the law itself. The man who embodies Roman virtue, placed outside the full community of Roman citizens by the act of embodying it. He is a slave, or a freedman, or a volunteer, a criminal, or a prisoner of war, or a man who made a calculation and signed a contract, a professional whose profession is dying or not dying, a celebrity whose celebrity comes with a legal stigma that the celebrity cannot remove. He is you. The history of the gladiatorial games is longer than most people know, and more complex than the popular image suggests. The games did not begin as mass entertainment. Their origins are funerary, connected to the munas, the obligation that the Roman world placed on the living to honor the dead with offerings. And the gladiatorial combat that emerged from this tradition was initially a private, limited affair, the obligation of wealthy families to provide a certain number of combats at the funerals of significant members. The transition from private funerary ritual to public mass entertainment happened gradually, over centuries, driven by the political utility of spectacle in a society where the ability to provide entertainment to the Roman people was a form of power, and the failure to provide it was a form of weakness. By your time, the reign of the Flavian emperors, the completion of the Colosseum, the late 1st century AD, the games have been a central institution of Roman public life for more than 4 centuries. 4 centuries of refinement, of the development of the types and the matchups and the rules and the infrastructure, of the Ludus system and the lanista profession, and the physician's role, and the summa rudis, and the editor's box, and the specific aesthetic of the gladiatorial bout that the Roman crowd has come to expect, and that you spend your professional life trying to deliver. The institution you are part of is ancient and sophisticated and embedded in the fabric of Roman civilization in ways that make it impossible to separate from the civilization itself. The question that the modern world asks about the gladiatorial games: how could they? How could a civilization that produced Virgil and Cicero and the Pantheon also produce this? Is the wrong question, or at least an incomplete one, because it assumes that the capacity for sublime cultural achievement and the capacity for brutal public spectacle are incompatible, and the Roman evidence suggests they are not. The same civilization produced both, not in spite of each other, but alongside each other. The same cultural values producing different expressions in different contexts. The virtus that the gladiatorial combat demonstrated was the virtus that the Aeneid celebrated, expressed in a different register. The Roman crowd that watched the bouts was not a separate population from the Roman crowd that listened to the poets. It was the same population, finding different things in different places. You are not a monster. You are not a victim. You are a professional, in a profession that your civilization created and values, and that you entered with your eyes open, and that you practice with a specific mixture of skill and courage and pragmatism and occasional fear that any demanding profession requires of the people who practice it. You are a person, specific and particular, with 5 wins and a thigh cut and a cell in the Ludus Magnus, and a friend named Quintus who watched your best shield work from the stands today and said so in the corridor afterward, and a physician named Demetrios who said not deep and meant it as kindness, and a trainer named Marcus Sola who said good before the bout and whose silence afterward said the rest. The gladiatorial life will end. All gladiatorial lives end, one way or another. The rudis, the wooden sword of freedom, is one ending, the formal grant of release that comes to fighters who have served long enough and well enough that the lanista or the editor offers it, the return to ordinary civilian life that the infamia does not entirely erase, but that the accumulated money and reputation of a successful gladiatorial career makes possible. Death is another ending, the ending that the popular image focuses on, and that the statistics of the period suggest is less common than the image implies. The death rate in gladiatorial bouts, based on the available evidence, was something like 1 in 6 or 1 in 8, high by any modern standard, but lower than the vision of inevitable slaughter that the popular image tends to produce. Injury is the third ending, the accumulated damage of years of combat that eventually makes continued fighting impractical. The body's long accounting finally demanding settlement. You do not know which ending is yours. You know it is not today. Today you are in your cell with the late afternoon light coming through the high window and the wound on your thigh making its presence known, and 5 wins recorded in the Lanista's books, and a calculation that is ongoing. The calculation that a man who signed a gladiatorial contract and has survived 5 bouts continues to make every day. The assessment of whether what the life gives is still worth what the life costs. Today the assessment is favorable. The money is real. The skill is real. The 5 wins are real. The thigh cut is real. And the physician said not deep, and the left arm will recover, and Marcus Sulla's silence said what his words did not need to say. What remains of a gladiator when the gladiator is gone? The Roman world was not indifferent to this question. the funeral monuments that gladiators erected for themselves and for each other, the inscriptions that have survived to be read 2,000 years later, show a specific and consistent set of concerns: the recording of the wins, the acknowledgement of the type, the naming of the lanista and the school, the occasional reference to the family that the gladiatorial life produced or maintained or left behind. They were proud of what they had done. They wanted it recorded. They wanted the specific content of their professional lives acknowledged in the permanent form that the Roman world reserved for things that mattered. Some of them lived long lives after the arena. The rudies and the money and the reputation and the transition to some other form of existence, training, commerce, the various alternatives that the post-gladiatorial life made possible. Some of them did not live long after the arena, or did not live past the arena at all, the ending coming in the way that endings come in arenas, suddenly and in public, with 70,000 people watching. Most of them are simply gone, their names recorded in the inscriptions that survive, and in the records of the schools, and in the crowd's memory, which was longer than we give it credit for, but shorter than stone. Your name is not famous yet. 5 wins is the beginning of something, not the thing itself. The reputation that the Roman crowd extends to fighters who have shown enough over enough bouts to become figures rather than simply fighters, names that are recognized and anticipated rather than simply announced. You are on the way to this, or you are not, depending on what the next bouts produce, and whether the thigh heals cleanly, and whether the calculation continues to come out in the direction it came out today. The candle needs replacing. You notice this in the way that the small domestic facts of daily life reassert themselves after the large demands of the day are met. The candle, the straw that needs turning, the water in the jug that needs refilling, the ordinary maintenance of an ordinary life that happens to contain, on specific days, the arena. You will sleep tonight. The body will insist on it. The accumulated expenditure of the day, producing a tiredness that goes beyond the ordinary fatigue of training days into something more total, the specific exhaustion of a body that has given everything that was asked of it and that is now claiming what it is owed. You will sleep, and tomorrow the thigh will be different, and the arm will be different, and Marcus Sulla will begin, in his precise and quiet way, the conversation about what comes next. The recovery, the modified training, the schedule of return to full practice. The next bout that will be scheduled when the lanista judges you ready. The light through the high window is golden now. The evening doing what evenings do in Rome. The city outside the Ludus walls settling into its night routines. The million people who did not go to the arena today, going about the business of their ordinary lives, and the million who did, carrying with them whatever they took from the afternoon. You were there, You were on the sand. You did what you trained for, and the accounting came out on the right side, and the physician said not deep, and Quintus said the right thing in the corridor, and Marcus Sulla's silence said the rest. Close your eyes now, if they are not already closed. Let the sounds of the Ludus grow quiet around you, the distant training yard, the corridor outside, the city beyond the walls. Let the weight of the armor and the weight of the day and the specific weight of everything that today was dissolved slowly into the particular quiet of sleep. The sand has been raked. The gate is closed. The crowd has gone home. You are still here. Good night. Sleep well.